Well, welcome everybody to the Poetry Room. It is always a pleasure to actually have poetry in the Poetry Room here at City Lights. I'm Peter Maravellis. I want to welcome you all. And to those of you online as well, welcome to you. And as always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush people. It is always an honor and a privilege to do so. So it is such a delight and a pleasure to have both Arthur Sze and Carol Moldaw with us tonight as a double bill. I don't think either of them have been with us. I know Arthur has not. I don't think either of you have. So this is such an honor and such a pleasure. So we're celebrating Into the Hush, which is published by Copper Canyon Press, and also The White Orchard, selected interviews and essays and poems. And also we have, Carol had a book that just came out last year called Go Figure. So we're also celebrating that. That came out from Fourth Way Books. So Arthur is an award-winning poet, translator, educator. His 12 books of poetry include The Glass Constellation, Sightlines, which was the winner of the National Book Award, Compass Rose, which is a Pulitzer Prize finalist, amongst many, many others. He is professor emeritus at the Institute of American Indian Studies and was the first poet laureate of Santa Fe. His poems have appeared in numerous publications. These include the American Poetry Review, The Atlantic, Conjunctions, the Paris Review, amongst many, many others. His work has been translated into 15 languages, and he makes his home in New Mexico. So, getting the evening started, we are delighted to have Carol Moldaw. She's a very lyrical poet and an author of 7 books of poetry. Her works include Beauty Refracted, So Late, So Soon, New and Selected Poems, The Lightning Field, which was winner of the Field Prize, amongst others. And as I mentioned, Go Figure was recently published by Fourth Way Books. She's the recipient of several literary honors, including a Merwin Conservancy Artist Residency, a National Endowment for the Arts Creators Writing Fellowship, a Pushcart Prize, and a Landon Foundation Residency Fellowship. Her work has appeared in Agni, the American Poetry Review, Harvard Review, the Kenyon Review, amongst many other places. We're going to open up a little bit of space for a Q&A at the end, so you may ask questions. And those of you online, you may post your questions in the chat function of the Zoom dashboard, with which we will also be posting links with which you may purchase books. And we're going to be having a signing at the very end, so we ask that everyone kind of maybe line up over on that side and just not crowd, our authors, but just, create a little single file. You may have the book signed and then pay for it on the way out. It is such a pleasure to have you both with us. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much, Peter. So does that sound good? The sound is fine. So yes, I'm delighted to be here. I was telling Peter that growing up in Palo Alto and Menlo Park, I would take the train to San Francisco, and City Lights was my iconic bookstore. Well, there was Kepler's down there, and there was City Lights up here. And between those two bookstores, I survived. So Go Figure is my 8th book of poetry, 8th book. And and Four Way Books always does a beautiful job, so I'm quite thrilled to be reading from it. It came out last September. And I'm just looking, here we go. And I'm on camera too. Okay. So I'm going to start with this poem called Richter Scale. And also I want to say it's so nice to see so many familiar faces and, of course, unfamiliar ones as well. Thank you all for coming. Richter Scale. If this were a crowd-sourced blueprint for the resistance, it would tell you what action to take. But it won't. It can't. Isn't, I'm afraid, built that way. It wants instead to daydream, to remember a sunset when a bevy of deer vogued in the meadow, all looking up at the same time while grazing, all 5 tilting their heads at the same angle, their tails held up like rattles about to twitch. I scroll news the way my father followed stocks, sensitive to the smallest tremor. A seismograph, a lie detector needle, my pen, its doodles on the scratch pad. In slow motion, who can tell which way things will fall? History in real time. The deer scatter when I blink. Scales. I'm off in 16 different directions, like a rum line, like the morphometrics in a butterfly's decorative eye. Something's not right, I write, which helps me, if not it. Symptoms are our goad and guide. This morning, last night, aggravation, desire, two different orders of dirty looks. Others may have experience of God. Interpretations, imaginings are what I know. A crescent moon's hammock slung low between two palms. To be absorbed in a trance, even of avoidance, I play solitaire, game of wordless patience. Then let the house go dark, light only the room I'm in. Night piece. Disoriented after we moved, I'd stumble on the equally insomniac moon all hours of the night, rolling from window to window, inching north as it traveled west, and slowly deflating as if pinpricked by the burr of a star. No matter what shape it was in, directly overhead the moon eluded me until a skylight would narrowly capture its brilliance heading for the drive. From our new entry's glass panels, I'd watch my old pellucid friend glide across the canyon and gild the Jemez before it sank like a coin in a slot, leaving me to find my way by feel to my side of our newly unfamiliar bed. So this next poem, I'm sorry, I have it all marked, but somehow I'm losing my place tonight. There we go. It's called Raccoons. And I don't know if there are any other poet couples, cohabitating poets in this audience, but I like to say I'm reading it for all cohabitating poet couples. Raccoons. On my way to water the strawberries at dusk, I gardened in those days. I saw a raccoon clasping the outdoor spigot like a sailor's wheel, using both paws that seemed more and more like hands as it kept twisting until water gushed out of the copper nozzle, and it drank. I hadn't thought of it in years, not even after I saw another raccoon high-stepping the coyote fence midday with a limp vole overhanging its mouth. Such a singular sight. I had to tell you, and blurted it out as soon as I saw you, a piece of domestic gossip like the first crocus or noisy neighbors. Common property, like so much in marriage. A small business, a friend calls it, down to the cooked books. Only later, after I spotted the raccoon sauntering through a line in one of your poems, only after the pressure cooker of my displeasure caused you to recast your raccoon and vole as skunk and mole, did I flash on the one I'd seen decades before. Its lack of furtiveness, the air it had of being within its rights, the way it took its time to retrace its steps to turn the water off. Or did it amble on and let the water run? No copyright protects idle talk, you might have said. Or the imaginarium of marriage knows no bounds. Well, every time I come back here, and I do come back as often as I have an excuse to, I think, why did I ever leave? So this is my a little love poem to Northern California, and it's called Northern California. Bulbous ropes of kelp the tide stranded, sandstone sea-break cliffs, eucalyptus groves, a hammock strung between redwoods. up scuffing dust with the pointy tips of my riding boots, walking down to the barn at camp, the Montecito Sequoia camp for girls. Lifting the canvas flap and leaning out of the top bunk in my flannel nightgown to whiff cold air and be dazed by stars. Shiny saw-toothed leaves of the live oak scattered through hills tawny with foxtails. Camellia bushes, oleander, bougainvillea. A bluff of salt-pocked Monterey cypresses twisted in the same configuration, like 50s teens, the boys with wind-blown ducktail flat tops. No sooner had I finally let on to myself that this was my psyche's landscape than it burst into hellish, unquenchable flames. This is a little small, short poem, Struck Dumb. My muse made mute by all that words entail, enigmas I assumed answerable in detail. How endlessly minute each minute is, subsumed when a relative absolute and silence dovetail. And this is the title poem, Go Figure. And it begins with a description of Khajuraho, which is a World Heritage Site, a Hindu temple in India. And it's covered, top to bottom with erotic sculpture, religious erotic sculpture. And so that's how the poem begins, with a description of that. Go figure. In her and her and her I saw myself. In carved sandstone, a voluptuary, my neck coiled to face my back twisted to pinch and raise for inspection, a small patch of almost out-of-reach skin. One foot planted, the other on toe, my toes on a narrow ledge high up the temple's facade. I'm unfazed by gaze of mason, acolyte, or tourist. And in her, also slightly coiled, rising out of the bath under a painter's gaze, I saw myself stepping over the tub's rim, sideways into the easel like a towel. You call me by the painter's name, a Lautrec, a Degas. Myself in veined marble, my towel now draped like a veil, or etched in a notched crosshatch illusion of fishnets. Hewn in block, empaneled in canvas, versions sketched, filmed, cellulite, digitized. Countless iterations find me poised as if alone at the mirror, examining eye, lip, brow, brush and palette in hand. The mirror goes back to grit, a sand that can't reflect, but absorbs the noon sun I peer up into, as into a museum's directed and calculated light, as into a church's perpetual dusk, cinema's blackout velvet. While I was writing this book, a book that was an influence on me was called Self-Portrait by Celia Paul. And Celia Paul is a British painter, a really remarkable painter, who's probably around my age. And in any case, she's written 2 books, and that was her first. And so in the next poem, which is called Painter and Model, and it's after Lucian Freud's painting, Painter and Model, Celia Paul is the painter who is the model in the painting. And I think she was 18 when he was in his 40s, and they, she eventually had her child is his child. I think that's a better way to say it than she had his child, right? Right, okay. Painter and Model 1. Because she paints barefoot, she's barefoot in his painting of her painting. Well, not painting, but modeling for him as the painter she is, and gazing toward her ostensible model, splayed nude on a battered brown leather Chesterfield. Well, not gazing. Her eyes, as he painted them, are downcast, the lids closed. If they were open, it seems by the bowing of her head that she'd be looking at the model's outthrust knee. Though what the viewer notices first and foremost is what the paintbrush idling between her clasped hands is angled toward, the model's resting uncut cock. Both her inner and his outer gaze are ambiguous, distanced. His attending somewhere beyond the painting he's in, perhaps focused on the back of the canvas being painted as he lies there, or on the fanatical painter, not her standing at his side who he did in fact model for, but the one outside the frame who positioned, checked, repositioned them both, on, just so. Or beyond him, and in a reverie of the imagined future, onto us, our scrutiny. Akimbo, one knee rests on the couch, pockmarked back, while the other extends over its edge, the weight of his heel on the floor, his curled toes pointing toward the same heap of squeezed-out paint tubes and crisscrossing brushes that her right foot is on the periphery of, her toes pressing on a tube that's oozing olive green. To me, this, a bottom left-center tangent made by the intersection of lines each set of toes invisibly extends, is the painting's not-so-secret heart. Her smock dress, used as her paint rag, is its own action painting. The cornered walls, a fresco's undercoat. Let's see, I'm gonna switch gears a little. And this is called Olmec. The bone-crushing pain of turning into a jaguar, palpable in the shaman's cleft head carved in basalt or jade, in his down-turned, squared-off open mouth, lips stretched and dilated in birthing, in a scream. Try to imagine yourself crossing from one world of pain into another, the quiet needed to summon the fury needed to catapult you over. For the umpteenth time, until entranced, I trace a talismanic cascade of curlicues copied from an old book. Images smuggled out from the border, TV loops stream into my closed eyes. In no other world but this, we watch as mother is again and again torn from child, no glyph known for repair. And this is called arthritis. Save your hands, my mother says, seeing me untwist a jar's tight cap, just the way she used to tell me not to let boys fool around or feel my breasts. Keep them fresh for marriage, as if they were actual fruit. I scoffed to think they could bruise, scuff, soften, rot, wither. I look down now at my knuckly thumbs, my index finger permanently askew in the same classic crook as hers, called a swan's neck. It's as if snapped, it's that pronounced. Even as I type, wondering how long I'll be able to, each joint in my left hand needing to be hoisted, prodded into place, one knuckle like a clock style clicking as it's turned to open, bend or unbend. I balk at the idea that we can overuse ourselves, must parcel out and pace our energies so as not to run out of any necessary component while still alive. the definition of necessary, necessarily suffering change over time. The only certainty is uncertainty I thought I knew, so ignored whatever she said about boys and sex, her version of a story, never mine. It made me laugh, the way she made up traditions, that we didn't kiss boys until a certain age, we didn't fool around. What we? What part of me was she? No part I could put my finger on. How odd then, one day, to find her half napping in her room, talking first to herself and then to me about a boy she used to know, her friend's brother, who she kissed, she said, just because he wanted her to. Now why would I do that, she mused, distraught anew and so freshly stung by the self-betrayal. I reached across the gulf my father left to her side of their bed and stroked my future hand. I'm just going to read two more poems, if I can find them. Scavengers. One by one, 6 or 7 ravens settle on the polished rim of our front courtyard's bowl-cut stone fountain. They cool their claws in the overflow, pecking at the placid water, a hint of gurgle at its center. From the window, I see them convening, conversing, but can't see why a flock is called an unkindness. To get at that, I'd have to be out among the carrion. When they leave, they lift off in one great rustle snap. Meditation in the open-air garage. Leaves have no choice but to articulate the wind. Aspens like zills, a glint and a tilt, the willow, a lone zither. Riffling the cottonwoods at dusk, winds find me cushioned against the concrete in the open-air garage, facing the trees, the drive, the road, the mountains up the canyon's other side, until an onrush bellows, a mindless, heartless ecstasy through the empty sack of me. Thank you.
What a pleasure to be here this evening, and I want to start by thanking Peter for inviting us to read at City Lights Bookstore. It's my first time to read here, and so many years ago when I was a student at UC Berkeley, it was Cody's bookstore on Telegraph Avenue and City Lights here in town that they were like my poetic education. I would rummage and find poets I didn't know and say, I should know these poets. I'm finding their works here in the store. So what a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be reading from 2 books that are a companion set, and the first book is called Into the Hush. Anvil. When a black butterfly flits past, when you glimpse the outlines of apple trees, when you smell the sprig of sunrise and walk up to the ditch, when bearing Aleut, Juma, Tuscarora join the list of vanished languages, when you turn a spigot and irrigate blossoming pear trees, when the time of your life is a time of earthquakes, when a woman hit by a car while crossing the street recovers, then slides into pain, when a matsutake emerges out of the rubble of Hiroshima, when a bartender blows smoke rings and slips through hoops into his past, when foragers slice ruchulas, amanitas, clitosibes, and pursue red-capped boletes, when water slips through roots rises through a trunk, streams into leaves. When in our bodies we sway and flood. When you bloody your hands, when the mind like this earth is struck and tilts its axis, when under summer stars you have built a cabin in the wilderness, when you gaze at Aldebaran and sense a first frost on the grass, when in our bodies we ride the waves of our earth, here is the anvil on which to hammer your days. There are two dramatic monologues in this book, one in the voice of a jaguar and one in the voice of an eraser, and I'm going to read just the jaguar song. Just after you sign and envision building homes on this tract, you smell me in the dark. Know that I move through this terrain at night, though you only think of building and selling. Even now you believe you can borrow my spirit by wearing a mask of my face on your face. Look at me. Delve into your fears. Is your deepest fear to be hacked, strangled, or be strapped to an IV in a bed with no chance to die? I can grasp a turtle and break its shell with one bite. I can pounce on a deer and crush its skull and neck with my teeth. You slash and burn in the jungle, force the snakes and macaws to retreat. You even burn your own species alive. Look into my eyes. I am your mirror and transformer. If you destroy my species, I will shapeshift and hunt you in your dreams. The fingerprints of your hands resemble the black rosettes on my skin, and you will not escape. You will never comprehend the twin nights in my eyes. Remember, as a child you came up the steps from the basement and flicking off the light at the top of the stairs, feared a hand about to grasp your shoulder from behind. That fear is alive. And now as you rummage for keys at your apartment doorstep, I am a passing jogger about to pounce. I am the creature who smells your darkest thoughts. And as you turn the key in the lock day or night, out of the darkness I spring. Vectors. First extinction in the Galapagos Islands, the least vermilion flycatcher. Hopis drill a foot deep and plant blue corn along a wash. Danger, a woman brushed on the side of a napalm bomb. In an oblong box emptied of firewood, a black widow web. Shaving, he nicked himself and stared in the mirror in a moment of blood. Out of a saddlebag, a teen pulls a severed goat's head. Before signing his name, he recalls hotel rooms were once used as torture chambers. In Thessaloniki, the beach attendant made a gun of his hand and fired at him. Prisoners cackled when the inmate on stage said, "Is it not time for my painkiller?" Weighing mushrooms, the Tibetan cashier grins. You suffer from suspicion. I suffer from kindness. A mercenary turned car mechanic spilled a pile of Krugerrands onto the table. Looking up from a tusk under the lamp, the carver smiled. It's butter in my hands. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, we have had a lot of seasonal wildfires, and it seems like almost every summer, and it's really just a question of how large and how huge they're going to be. And This was written after one of them, wildfire season. The wind stokes flames, and they leap across the fire line to the north. A jagged red and yellow ridge line crackles with billowing clouds of smoke. To the far north, a singer stretches walrus bladder and, completing a box drum, starts to hum. He nods as a song takes shape in his hands. The smallest subatomic particles trace the birth of the cosmos. Traces of scorpion venom will lead to new cures. One day they will extract heavy metals from the moon. The spider in a sink sips from a droplet of water. Leafcutter ants will one day march across a radioactive forest. In this wind, pear trees unfold white blossoms, shape a song as time detonates inside of time. In 2017, a rare hummingbird called a blue-throated hill star was discovered in the Andean highlands, and the hill star feeds on a special flower, a chucaragua flower that has a bright yellow-orange flame. And that's in this poem, Leafless. Sunlight strikes the leafless aspen branches, strikes the white picket fence, and as I look at highlighted edges, my eyes sting. Tufted grass stalks sway in the flooding rays, and in the poinsettia of this hour, I need some darkness to bloom. In this space, a snow leopard leaps among rocks. The rosettes of its fur a moving landscape, its hunger scents the air. As I exhale, a blue-throated hill star sips from a chucaragua flower. A fly agaric pushes out of soil. A raccoon scampers backward down an elm. We are always running from and lunging to. When we stop, the eagle feather of this pause blesses. Before light of the shortest day lifts to the hills, it runs across my line of sight in widening gold. This next poem is the title poem from this book of interviews and essays, and I did a email interview with Eileen Tabios, a poet and fiction writer who lives in St. Helena in Marin County. And she asked me how many drafts I had gone through to write this poem, and I looked and I counted 88 drafts. And she said, I want to interview you about how this poem was created. And the poem is an invented form that I call a cascade. I was interested in exploring musicality inside of the poem and repetition, but instead of having, say, the same word appear at the beginning of each line of a poem, I gave myself the stricture of asking myself what would happen if each line had to pick up a word or words from the previous line. So this is called The White Orchard. Under a supermoon, you gaze into the orchard. A glass blower shapes a glowing orange mass into a horse. You step into a space where you once lived. Crushed mica glitters on plastered walls. A raccoon strolls in moonlight along the top of an adobe wall. Swimming in a pond, we notice a reflected cottonwood on the water. Clang, a deer leaps over the gate. Every 15 minutes, an elephant is shot for its tusks. You mark a bleached, earless lizard against the snowfall of this white page. The skins of eggplants glistening in a garden, or bodies glistening by firelight. Though skunks once ravaged corn, or bright moments cannot be ravaged. Sleeping near a canal, you hear lapping waves. At dawn, waves lapping and the noise of men unloading scallops and shrimp. No noise of gunshots. You focus on the branches of 100-year-old apple trees. Opening the door, we find red and yellow rose petals scattered on our bed. Then, light years. You see pear branches farther in the orchard as the moon rises, branches bending under the snow of this white page. And I'm going to read one sequence. It's in 6 sections. This will be the final poem, and it's the title poem to Into the Hush. A magpie feather gleams in the grass. Today, you are not having open heart surgery, nor are you strapped to a hospital bed inhaling oxygen. You do not mix cement and sand in a wheelbarrow, nor did you sleep the night in a field off an interstate highway. This morning, you live in a sparrow's warble, in pale green leaves trembling in sunshine. You catch the curling wave of the day where peas flower on a trellis, where apricot blossoms tinge the tips of 100-year-old tree. Weeding in the garden, you get stronger as you dig. You become well, island, field. Out of nowhere, a rough-legged hawk glides downward with outstretched wings. Aspen leaves flutter without wind. When you've worked this long, your art is no longer art, but a wand that wakes your eyes to what is. Purple irises about to unfurl. He tries to stain the sanded redwood deck, but cottonwood tufts land everywhere. Smell of bread rising from a basement oven. Gold earrings on a bedside table. A cloud passes across the sun and darkens the brick. When is becoming. Digging a trench for a new water line, he shovels a blue bottle up into daylight. As a supermoon drops to the horizon. Lichens on a bridge absorb truck fumes. Larger than Manhattan and iceberg calves off the Antarctic shelf. A man at a gas station opens fire on others. In the dark, you can't see coyotes beyond the fence, but hear them gather. A skater leaps into a triple Lutz, then slips on landing. A dog trots up with a headless raven in its mouth. As a hawk glides over a canyon with outstretched wings, you scan for movement. Titanium scraps dumped into a barrel of radioactive waste start sparking. Something starts sparking inside you. Walking on a sheet of ice over a lake, you sense the edge of danger changing shape underneath. Literal facts of this world tighten in a noose. A swift stays airborne for months, while a flicker sips water pooled on a tarp. On a ladder, lifting a nest off a beam, I find dried mud at the base. Inside are no eggs or parts of shell. The marred circular interior contains, with the skewed stalks of the exterior, where in a flurry of wings a sparrow bled, and 2 crows feasted on eggs. I have no wings or winged sandals, am no guide to the realm of the dead, but basking in this June light, I hear a neighbor's chainsaw run all afternoon against an elm by the street, and wince, let go, wince, let go. Then mycorrhizal, as mind and nature entwine each other, and as a skater gathers speed, I lift off the ice, not knowing if I will fail or land, but in the spin of a leap, lift in the risk of what we may become, and find a daylight inside day. The peyote plant in this pot has not shifted hue or grown the slightest. Month after month, staring at the crown, I yearn for a bud, but none appears. And its blue slate hue is like gazing down a clouded gravel road at dusk. Yet, in this ocotillo moment, I smell how this place craves rain. A woodpecker has drilled holes into a pinon trunk, and I write into the hush. At dawn, as outlines of a Japanese maple emerge out of darkness, the black branches of an alligator juniper with sky whitening behind, I ride along the curve of an expanding wave that delineates the shapes of all things. Near the front door, I snap the twig of a lavender bush. As a hunter of a gemsbok runs for hours in the gate of a gemsbok, in spring, I want to take on the contours of spring before stepping out. Out of the blue of a robin's egg, out of the abyss when a cellist pauses between notes, out of the semaphore of saying something we did not know we knew, out of an Olmec dagger unearthed when digging a new subway line, out of all seasons at once. Praise to finding a single black morel in a cardiologist's garden, to aspen leaves motionless after rain, to finding a rotating lighthouse beam when waves crashed against our vessel under lightning-filled clouds, to the lichen green with wavy edges on a wet black trunk, to the sunlight we awaken in each other. Praise to the white balls of viburnum that effloresce and drop to the ground, to the gold shower when a violinist's bow runs against strings, to the radiating joy, grief, despair, hope, love that makes us human, to the patter of rain on the roof before sunrise, to daylight that is daylight, to the hush that is now. Thank you.
Well, we would like to offer you in the room and those online the opportunity to maybe ask some questions. I can get it started myself. You mentioned the use of constraints in your work. Is the Oulipo an influence? Oulipo.
Not directly, but definitely through the idea of what happens when you create your own creative constraints that force you to discover new terrain or new areas of experience that you wouldn't otherwise encounter.
Let's see if there's anyone in the room? No? Usually takes a few seconds for the gray cells to kick in. And no one online? Oh, yes.
Hi, Arthur. Good to see you again. I'm wondering, you do a lot of translation work as well, and I'm wondering when you think about like simultaneity or synchronicity in all the poems you just shared, how you think that can carry across different languages, or if you're thinking about, or if your work in translation also informs like all the different areas of the world you're drawing from.
My work in translation is really how I learned my craft. So I apprenticed myself to ancient Chinese poetry, Tang Dynasty poetry, and then Chinese poets from other time periods. And in doing that, I would write out character by character, stroke by stroke, each of the Chinese poems. And as you know, the way the characters work is very nonlinear, and it's more like an image of, for me, magnetism of different fields of energy. So you take a certain radical like field and you put heart and mind below it. And to put your heart and mind in the field, which is a metaphor, is the word to think. So thinking is actually very physical. Or if you take autumn and you put autumn in the heart or mind, then you create the word sorrow. So I learned through translating Chinese poetry this idea of how different forces could coexist in a poem without one prioritizing or dominating the other, so there's not a sense of hierarchy.
Paul online has a question. He says, I'm curious about the role of silence in poetry. Can you tell us more about the silences in classical Chinese poetry? And can you talk about the silences and transitions between your one-line stanzas? On a similar note, what are your thoughts about the function of the M dash at the end of each fragment and image?
Where do I start? And maybe, Carol, you'll want to think about. You may want to address the issue of silence in a minute after I respond. Okay. So the issue of M dashes, I think for me, has to do with instability or provisional status. There's no period at the end of that poem or those lines, and the dashes are there because they're open-ended, and one can, the images leap, so one isn't obliged or locked into a particular place and time. If there's a phrase and there's a dash and another phrase and a dash, I, as a poet, as the writer, can change place, change time, change tone, change perspective, change emotional nuance. And the issue of silence is really important, I think, because I tend to like to load poems with visual images, but I don't want to just overload the poem for a reader. I want the reader to have space to be able to register a particular phrase or passage, and that silence gives the reader a bit of room to listen and focus before the next wave comes, but also that sense that there's a dance between silence and sound that's really crucial to how a poem works.
Let's see, is there anyone in here? No. Okay, Yehudis asks, is your familiarity with nature a general interest, or is it specifically cultivated for your poetry?
It's not specifically cultivated, but I think I have a keen interest in nature. Rosanjin, one of the great Japanese potters, used to tell his students, you don't learn how to be a great potter by studying with me or going to school. Nature is actually the best teacher, and he would have apprentice potters who worked with him. He would send them out into nature basically and say, look, pay attention, think carefully about what you're seeing, what can you learn from that? So again, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and there's a lot of wide open space. I'm a mushroom hunter. There's things that when I was a kid, I loved collecting leaves, and I was just fascinated by the shapes of leaves. So that engagement with nature has always been there, and then it's just been, how do I deepen it? How do I expand it? And it's been organic.
Hi, it's good to see you again. This question sort of emerges from the fact that your poems cover a lot of different subjects, from things like imagining the voice of a jaguar to wildfire season in Santa Fe, as you mentioned. I'm curious, when you try and write the best poem that you can write, would you say there are ever times where it feels as though you have to pick a worthy enough subject to write a poem about? Or would you say that all of your poems are an attempt to better understand, I suppose, the figments of the world around you?
I think it has to do with better understanding everything around me and to deepen that experience. And I'm sort of drawing on Rilke in Letters to a Young Poet, when the young poet writes Rilke and says, I don't have these incredible life experiences to write about. Rilke says, well, first, use your childhood. That's something you can draw on. But also be humble and think that any experience, if you, again, draw on it and give it space and depth to emerge, that the true poem will emerge. And there isn't anything that looks superficial that can't become a deep poem.
I'd like to add to that, or to any of them, but we happened to see the really incredible Ruth Asawa retrospective today, and I noticed a quote from her on the wall about, and this is a paraphrase, of course, but the artist is the one who makes something extraordinary out of something ordinary. And so I don't think, to say that a subject has to be, I can't remember how you said it, elevated enough. That isn't the point in my point of view either. But I love that quote from Ruth Asawa.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Carol. One of the things that really echoes in all your poems is the human body, whether it's your mother's hands and hearing her talking about this story, and seeing that amazing place where there was the religious place in India where there was all those bodies. And I don't have to list your, the images back to you, but I'm so interested. There was the question about silence, but I'm sort of interested in all the places that the human mind goes while contemplating bodies. And there was a way in which, I don't know, I just felt your poems open that up a little compared to sort of some of the ways that we think of poetry looking at the human body or experiencing it physically too. So,
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, but I think, when I think of nature, I think of the external world, but I also think of human nature and the psyche and the body, and I do think of the psyche and body being very entwined. And then also as a woman, particularly in Go Figure, I was thinking a lot about the female body, my body, the images of the body being seen, not seen, feeling oneself seen. And so there is a lot of embodiment in my work. And I think that's, when I think of nature, I also think of embodiment. I think of the way we're incarnated, in a sense. And that's something that's important for me to, the idea of spirit and matter being entwined is something important in my work, important to me in my work. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Last call. Oh, yes.
This is for Carol. I've heard, this is the second time I've heard you read, and this newest book of your poetry, a lot of the sources for your poems seem to be intergenerational reflections and observations. And I'm wondering, if that is something that will extend to your daughter.
I think it's extended to her in the past, actually, more. In my last book, Beauty Refracted, there were many poems for and about Sarah, or even in as far back as The Lightning Field, Sarah was born in China, and there's a poem about going to the orphanage. So, but as she's gotten older, I have felt more hands off in terms of her as being poetic material. A kind of that it's not my place anymore.
More the role of parenthood as as our parents depart and both parenthood is.
On my being a parent, I'm not sure. Yeah, well, I feel like that's something I've actually, so, even I'm trying to think. There was another poem just flashed through my mind, but I think that and there are a couple of poems in this book that I didn't read that reflect Sarah's growing up, or particularly my role as a parent. And I do think that with this book, I was really seeing through the eyes myself as a woman. I was very aware of that, and I think that's one reason there's so many intergenerational poems, because as women we tend to think about our relations to others. We're very interrelational, and that has been a subject, sort of, yeah. So thank you.
I'd like to know about your relationship to mushrooms, what they represent.
Well, my son Micah is in the audience, and Mike and I used to, for many summers, go mushroom hunting in the mountains north of Santa Fe. We discovered a naturalist, Bill Isaacs, who taught a class through the Santa Fe Community College. And I think I had an interest in mushrooms, but I always had the sense too that they're dangerous. It was like, don't eat this, you can die from it. And then it was really a revelation to go up into the mountains of northern New Mexico on Saturday mornings and collect mushrooms and have a naturalist sort of show us which were the really choice edible ones, which were poisonous. It wasn't just like, here are the 3 mushrooms you want to collect and they're really tasty. It was like, learn the whole ecology of the situation. And so one thing led to another, and for me, it led to this idea of learning a terrain. Like if you look for oyster mushrooms, they grow on dead or dying aspen. And in New Mexico, that's a certain kind of a forest at a certain elevation. So if you go too high into spruce and fir, there's no chance of finding them. And if you want to find a chanterelle or a bolete, you want to be looking under the spruce and fir. So there's this whole sense of learning to read nature. And also this idea, for me, has been sort of what's visible and what's invisible, that the mushrooms are unseen below the surface, and then they sort of fruit up if the temperature and the rain is right, then if the conditions are right, you can have these massive fruitings of mushrooms. So for me, it just became a way of moving in the world that, again, happened organically. It wasn't like, okay, now I want to learn about mushrooms. It was more like, this is something we can do, we can learn, and one thing led to another.
I was wondering if you could both talk about what it's like being cohabitating poets. And
Yeah, please, come on. It's waiting for you to come.
Well, I wasn't invited. Go ahead. You talk first.
I think early on, Carol and I would share drafts of poems with each other, and that was a really intense, exciting period where you can, as a poet, as a writer, you can be too close to your own work, and so it was really helpful to have, to be able to share work in progress. And over time, we've stepped back from that because, say, if we were traveling in India, we would have different lenses or different perspectives of the same experience, and we wanted to give each other space to, and not sort of be influencing each other too closely.
Yeah, it's interesting because we have very different rhythms as poets. So Arthur tends to write from immediate experience or immediate perception, and I take longer. For instance, say that trip to India. I probably finished a poem 5 years later about that trip. So I don't particularly want to to be in the middle of my process and see what he's done with it. I just rather be undisturbed in my process. So there is that. At the same time, it's wonderful to share work. So there's a bit of tension in it, in that regard, just the process, and I think it's quite special to have some deep understanding of what each other is doing. That I think it's remarkable and special and creates a kind of intimacy. At the same time, you end up realizing, well, your work is your work and his work is his work, and you need to each of you, privileges your own work in a way. You have to, or you won't get it done. So I'd say there's a wonderful creative tension in both being cohabitating writers. Yeah.
I'm curious just about how you guys mentioned like traveling and maybe like learning about like a variety of cultural influences and like the role that plays in your guys' work. I'm curious if you feel like, for example, if you hadn't been picking mushrooms directly but knew that you could pick mushrooms, or if you hadn't gone to India and traveled there immediately but knew about, like, for example, like the Temple of Sculptures, would you guys feel as though you were still able to write the poems that you did if you hadn't been there directly or hadn't experienced those things directly? Yes, I guess I'm just curious about that.
Well, that is an interesting question. I do think that the answer is probably different for every poet. I don't think I would have written poems about going to Agra, where the Taj Mahal is. I wrote two of them, and one of them is actually just sort of a history a short, like sonnet length history that contrasts the love story that we know to the reality of the founders' lives. That I could have written just from reading a guidebook with my own take on it. The experience of going to Agra, which is the other poem, I couldn't have written without having been there. So it quite varies on the poem, or say my poem Olmec, which is really just from looking at sculpture and thinking about deportations, not from my having experienced either of those things more directly, so that came out of a deep both thinking and maybe empathetic experience without actual experience. So
yeah, I think it's a fascinating issue. I think in a way you're also sort of asking, well, can you just, what's the role of research possibly in a poem? Like in my experience, travel in Japan decades ago was really, really important. And if I were just sort of reading or researching in a book, it wouldn't have worked. When I was actually traveling in Japan, I was struck by how so many Chinese ideas and concepts were made physical and compressed and radicalized in the kind of space that exists in Japan. And even though I don't know any Japanese, for instance, to walk in Ryoanji, the famous Zen garden that has 15 stones that you can never see all at once. 3 of the 4 sides are walled, and then you walk back and forth. I mean, if I were looking at a book, I could conceptualize that, but it was another thing to be there early in the morning when the gates had just opened, to actually sit there, to be walking back and forth, to look at the textures of ochre on the walls, to get the smell of the cryptomeria trees, to have that sensation. That experience was really important. And then research could add to it. I could learn some of the history, but the research by itself wouldn't be enough. That sort of personal experience needed to be there.
Well, if that's it, I would like to thank you both for gracing our halls, and thank you all for joining us, and for those of you online as well. And
Thank you.
it's a pleasure.